You know, if you were born in ancient Egypt, chances are you'd end up farming. Wheat, barley, maybe herding goats if you were lucky. That was supposed to be my life too. My father was a farmer, his father was a farmer, and everyone just assumed I'd spend my days knee-deep in mud, chasing stubborn donkeys and yelling at the Nile to rise on time. But life had other plans for me. One morning, a royal messenger came strutting into our village. You could tell he was important by the way everyone moved out of his path, like he carried the smell of Pharaoh himself. He unrolled a scroll and read out names. And there it was, my name. Congratulations, son of a farmer. You've just been chosen to help build the biggest tomb in history. Lucky me, right? At first, I didn't know whether to puff out my chest in pride or run away and hide behind my mother's skirt. On one hand, this was the chance of a lifetime. On the other, well, I'd just been volunteered to haul stones heavier than my entire family combined. But let's rewind for a moment. To understand what it meant to be called for pyramid duty, you've got to picture Egypt at the time. The Nile was our lifeline. Every year it flooded, leaving rich black soil behind. Without it, we'd be a giant sandbox with too much sun. Thanks to the river, though, we had wheat, barley, vegetables, and fish. Boats carried goods up and down like little ants on a watery highway. Along the riverbanks, markets buzzed with life, traders shouting, kids chasing each other, bakers pulling bread out of clay ovens. It smelled like sweat, dust, onions, and occasionally something good if you were standing near a bakery. And above it all, like the sun in the sky, was Pharaoh. To us, he wasn't just a king, he was a god walking among men. His word could move armies, shift borders, and apparently decide that I'd be better off dragging limestone blocks instead of harvesting grain. So, with mixed feelings, I packed up my things, which didn't take long since I owned about 3 tunics and a wooden comb, and joined a group of other chosen men heading to the royal worksite. When I first saw the pyramid rising out of the desert, my jaw nearly dropped. It wasn't finished, of course, but even halfway built, it looked like the gods themselves had dropped a mountain in the sand. I thought to myself, how in Ra's name are we supposed to finish this? The work camp was like a whole town built just for us workers. Rows of mud brick houses, storage rooms stacked with grain and beer jars, and even little workshops where tools were made. They called it a village, but it felt more like an army base. Everyone had a role, rules were strict, and the overseers did not joke around. You showed up late, you got whipped. You messed up cutting stone, you got whipped. You looked at the overseer the wrong way. Well, you get the idea. On my first day, they didn't hand me a chisel or rope. No, I got training. Not the kind where you sit in a classroom and learn numbers, but the let's see how long you can carry a block before you collapse kind. By midday, I thought my arms had fallen off somewhere in the sand, but there was also this strange sense of pride. The scribes explained to us that building the Pharaoh's pyramid wasn't just about making a tomb. It was about eternity. Every stone we set wasn't just stacked on another. It was stacked toward heaven. Our Pharaoh wanted his soul to live forever among the stars. And somehow, by sweating under the desert sun, we were helping make that happen. That night, lying on a straw mat in the workers' village, I couldn't stop thinking. Part of me missed the simple life back home, fishing in the Nile, listening to my mother scold me for being lazy, the smell of onions frying in a clay pot. But another part of me felt something new, a sense of belonging to something bigger. My name might not be remembered, but these stones, they would stand long after I was dust. Still, don't get me wrong, I wasn't some noble hero who jumped out of bed every morning with joy. No way. The first few weeks, I thought my back would snap in two. My hands blistered, my shoulders ached, and when I finally stumbled back to my mat at night, even the thought of chewing bread felt like too much work. And yet, every morning, the overseer's shout dragged me up again. And slowly I learned. I learned how to grip a rope so it wouldn't tear the skin off my palms. I learned to walk in step with the team when hauling blocks so the sled didn't tip. I learned how to keep my mouth shut when the overseer was glaring my way. Useful skills for survival. But I also learned discipline. Life in the workers' village was strict, but it had order. You woke, you worked, you ate, you slept. The days blended together, but there was a rhythm to it. And maybe, just maybe, I started to find a strange comfort in that rhythm. So there I was, a farmer's son turned pyramid builder, standing in the desert, in the shadow of something massive, something eternal, half scared, half proud, but fully aware that my life would never be the same. And this was only the beginning. So picture this. I'm standing at the base of the half-built pyramid, squinting up at this giant mountain of stone. The sun is blazing, the sand is burning, and I'm thinking, yep, this thing is definitely taller than my house. Actually, it's taller than my entire village stacked on top of itself. The overseers told us that this wasn't just a pile of rocks. No, this was going to be the Pharaoh's eternal resting place, his ladder to the heavens, his VIP pass into the afterlife. Honestly, I couldn't even afford an extra beer ration, and here was the Pharaoh planning a mansion for eternity. Must be nice being a god king. Still, I couldn't deny it. It felt epic. To be here, part of something this huge. Not just huge in size, but huge in meaning. Generations would look at this pyramid and whisper, how did they even do that? And somewhere in the middle of those whispers, I could imagine my voice saying, well, with a lot of sweat, broken backs, and questionable teamwork. My job, hauling limestone? Yeah, not glamorous. I wasn't carving hieroglyphs or smoothing perfect edges like the skilled craftsman. Nope, I was one of the guys yanking ropes, dragging blocks, and praying the sled didn't crush my toes. Here's how it worked. The limestone was quarried nearby. Men with copper chisels hacked away at the rock, pounding day and night. When a block was freed, it was shoved onto a wooden sled. Then came us, teams of sweaty, groaning men roped together like cattle, dragging the sled across sand that never seemed to end. And to make it worse, the overseer stood nearby, holding a stick and yelling things like, "Pull harder! The Pharaoh waits for no man," as if Pharaoh himself was tapping his foot impatiently on the other side. To keep the sleds moving, workers poured water on the sand ahead of us. Sounds strange, right? But it actually helped. Wet sand packed tighter so the sled slid smoother. I swear the day I figured this out, I looked at water like it was magic. Forget wine, forget gold. Give me a jug of water on a hot day, and I'll worship it like a god. Then there were the ramps. You see, pyramids don't exactly come with stairs. The geniuses, and they really were geniuses, built massive ramps of mud brick and rubble, sloping up along the sides. The higher the pyramid rose, the longer and crazier the ramps became. Our job was to drag blocks up those ramps without collapsing halfway and rolling back down like squashed dates. Trust me, watching a 10-ton block slide backwards was not fun. You learned quickly to stay out of the way. Tools. Simple, but effective. Copper chisels, wooden mallets, levers, and ropes made from papyrus. Nothing fancy, but somehow it worked. The real magic wasn't in the tools. It was in the people. The coordination, the shouting, the rhythm of hundreds of men pulling in unison, like an orchestra of sweat and curses. And of course, hovering over us like hawks were the overseers. They wore clean linen, held staffs, and acted like the gods had personally appointed them to make our lives miserable. Above them were the scribes with their reed pens and scrolls, counting every stone, every worker, every loaf of bread we received. Nothing escaped their records. Worker 342 showed up late. Worker 57 broke a chisel. Worker 128 collapsed in the sun. Honestly, I think they enjoyed writing down punishments more than numbers. But the ones who gave the whole thing a holy shine were the priests. They came in often, dressed in spotless white, carrying incense burners and chanting to the gods. Before we dragged massive blocks into place, they sprinkled water and muttered blessings. May Ra guide this stone. May Osiris protect these workers. I always wondered if the gods could hear them over our grunts. But hey, if it meant fewer accidents, I wasn't complaining. Life on the construction site was brutal, but strangely organized. The day began at dawn with the overseer's shout. We got bread and beer for breakfast. Not exactly a feast, but it kept us moving. Then it was straight to the ramps, dragging, hauling, cutting, stacking. Hours blurred together under the sun. If we were lucky, a breeze might sneak through, carrying the smell of the Nile. Most of the time, though, it was just sand in our noses and sweat stinging our eyes. You'd think all this would break a man, but the promise of food, beer, and shelter kept us going. Don't underestimate beer, by the way. In Egypt, beer wasn't just a drink, it was survival. Thick, filling, and slightly sour, it gave you the energy to haul a block that felt like it wanted to crush you flat. Some men joked that beer was the true god of Egypt. I wasn't entirely sure they were wrong. Still, no matter how tired we were, there was this feeling. A strange kind of pride. Every time a block thudded into place, every time the pyramid climbed a little higher, you felt it. We weren't just breaking our backs. We were part of something eternal, something that might outlast time itself. Of course, I also had my doubts. Late at night, when the camp was quiet, I'd wonder, do we really matter? Or are we just ants building a sandcastle for Pharaoh? But then, the next morning, standing in line with hundreds of others, I'd hear the chants, see the massive blocks rising, and I'd forget the doubts, at least for a while. So there it was, day after day, hauling stone, cutting, building ramps, listening to overseers bark orders while priests waved incense. Exhaustion burned in our bones, but pride burned too, a strange balance holding us upright. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The pyramid still had a long way to go, and so did I. If you think pyramid builders spent their entire lives dragging stone under the hot sun, you'd only be half right. The other half? We actually had lives outside the construction site. And believe it or not, the workers' village was kind of nice. Well, nice in the ancient Egyptian sense. Don't picture palaces with pools and golden furniture. Picture mud brick houses, dusty streets, and kids running barefoot while goats stole onions from baskets. That was home. The village was set up close to the pyramid, so we didn't have to march across half of Egypt every morning. It was built with rows of small houses, one-room or two-room huts made from sun-dried bricks. The walls were thick enough to keep the heat out most of the time, and the roofs were flat, perfect for sleeping outside during cooler nights. Privacy? Forget it. You could hear your neighbor snoring through the wall like he was lying right beside you. Still, it beat living in a tent. Each house had a mat to sleep on, a clay oven for baking bread, and a few jars for beer and water. My proudest possession was a little clay pot where I kept salt. Doesn't sound like much, but when your food is mostly bread and onions, a pinch of salt can make you feel like Pharaoh himself. Speaking of food, let's talk meals. The official pyramid diet wasn't glamorous, but it worked. Bread was the main star. Thick, heavy loaves that could double as building blocks if you let them sit too long. Alongside that, onions, beans, and dried fish. And, of course, beer. Always beer. We drank it in the morning, afternoon, and evening. It wasn't strong like the fancy stuff people drink today. It was more like liquid bread, filling and full of energy. Some days it felt like beer was the only reason half of us survived. And let's be honest, after hours of dragging stone, sitting with a jar of beer and a chunk of bread felt like a feast. I'd tear into it, laugh with the guys, and think, yep, life's not too bad. But it wasn't all work and food. We had festivals too. Egyptians loved festivals, and the priests made sure we celebrated the gods often, probably to keep us from collapsing from sheer exhaustion. During these times, the whole village came alive. There were processions with music, drummers pounding rhythms that made your chest vibrate, women dancing, men singing hymns, and plenty of beer flowing like the Nile in flood season. Offerings were made to the gods for protection, especially to Ptah, the god of craftsmen, and Hathor, the goddess of joy. Some prayed for strength, some prayed for fewer blisters, and I prayed my overseer would lose his voice for a week. Rituals were everywhere. Before big projects, priests blessed our tools with incense. Before meals, some men muttered thanks to the Nile. Even the smallest things had a touch of the divine. If a raven flew overhead, people whispered about omens. If a block cracked the wrong way, someone swore it was a curse. Me, I wasn't superstitious, but after a few accidents, I started tossing little prayers into the air just in case. Can't hurt, right? Community life in the village was its own world. Friendships formed quickly when you worked shoulder to shoulder all day. We shared meals, told stories, and laughed at jokes that were only funny because we were too tired to care. Rivalries happened too. Someone would take an extra ration of beer or hog the shade at break time, and suddenly you had shouting matches that ended in shoves. But usually it blew over. After all, we needed each other to survive. Of course, not everything was rosy. Injuries were common. Men crushed fingers, strained backs, or got heat stroke under the relentless sun. There was no doctor waiting with bandages. If you were lucky, someone tied a rag around the wound and prayed it wouldn't get infected. If you weren't, well, let's just say there were graves near the village too. And then there were punishments. Disobey the overseer, skip work, or try to sneak away, and you'd feel the whip. Some men carried scars across their backs as permanent reminders of Pharaoh's discipline. It wasn't fair, but none of us really expected fairness. You kept your head down, did your work, and hoped the stick landed on someone else's back. Despite the harshness, we found ways to rebel. Small, quiet acts. Someone might hide a good tool to keep it for himself. Someone else might slack off, pretending to push the sled while barely touching the rope. Once, a group of men even delayed their work by claiming the gods sent bad omens, though I'm pretty sure the only omen was that they were hungover from last night's beer. I'll admit there were nights I lay awake wondering if this was worth it. My body ached, my hands were raw, and I thought about my family back by the Nile. Farming seemed hard when I was a kid, but compared to this, digging in the mud for onions suddenly sounded like paradise. But then morning came. The sun rose, the camp stirred, and life went on. We ate, we laughed, we worked. We carried stones and carried each other through the pain. And somehow the pyramid kept rising, one block at a time. The workers' village wasn't perfect. It was dusty, noisy, and sometimes cruel. But it was also full of life. It was where we ate, where we prayed, where we cursed the overseers, and where we dreamed about finishing the impossible. It was where we weren't just workers. We were neighbors, friends, rivals, a strange little family tied together by stone, sweat, and beer. Looking back, I realized the village was just as important as the pyramid itself, because without that community, none of us would have lasted a single season. And somehow, in that little cluster of mud brick houses, we found a reason to keep going. When you're hauling stone from sunrise to sunset, you need more than bread and beer to keep going. You need faith. And in Egypt, faith was everywhere. It was baked into the bread we ate, woven into the songs we sang, and written on every wall we passed. From the very first day on the pyramid site, the priests made sure we understood. This wasn't just construction. No, this was holy work. Every stone we laid was one step closer to eternity. For Pharaoh, yes, but also for us. They told us that by helping him reach the afterlife, we secured a little piece of it for ourselves. A buy one, get one free kind of deal for souls. And I'll admit, on days when my back screamed and my hands bled, that promise was the only thing keeping me upright. The priests were everywhere. You could spot them a mile away, clean linen robes, shaved heads, smelling faintly of incense. While the rest of us were covered in dust and sweat, they looked like they'd just stepped out of a temple. They'd come to bless the stones, sprinkle water, chant prayers to the gods. May this block stand firm for eternity. May Ra watch over those who carry it. I used to wonder if Ra was really watching or if he had better things to do, like sailing his fiery boat across the sky. But when you're dragging a block that could crush you flat, you don't argue. You nod, mutter thanks, and hope the gods are actually paying attention. Religion wasn't just about rituals, it was woven into daily life. The overseers reminded us constantly, your labor honors Pharaoh, and Pharaoh is a god. Imagine being told every day that the sweaty man yelling at you to pull harder was basically working for a divine being. It made obedience a lot easier, or at least harder to argue with. And then there were the omens. Egyptians loved omens. A bird flying overhead, a sign, a block cracking, a curse, someone sneezing at the wrong moment. Bad luck for everyone. One time, while dragging a block up the ramp, a lizard scurried across the path. Half the team dropped the ropes, refusing to move until a priest burned incense and declared the lizard harmless. Me? I just thought the lizard was smarter than all of us. It wasn't hauling stone under the sun. Still, I couldn't deny that belief gave the work meaning. It transformed endless labor into a sacred duty. Without it, we'd just be slaves to stone. With it, we were part of Pharaoh's journey to eternity. And maybe, just maybe, that meant our names wouldn't be lost to time completely. Now let me talk about Pharaoh himself. Did I ever meet him? No. Did I ever even get close? Also no. But once, I saw him from a distance. It was during one of the big ceremonies when the priests came to bless the pyramid's rising walls. The workers lined up, sweating and squinting, while the royal procession swept in. And there he was, Pharaoh, draped in gold, wearing a crown that shimmered in the sun, carried like a god on earth. The air seemed to shift around him. The crowd bowed so low I thought we'd never get up again. I tried to sneak a glance, just a glimpse. His face was painted calm, distant, like he lived in a world above ours. He didn't look like a man who worried about blisters or back pain. He looked eternal. And in that moment, I kind of understood why people worshipped him. He wasn't just a king, he was Egypt itself, walking, breathing, shining. Still, when the procession left and the overseer shouted at us to get back to work, I couldn't help thinking, well, God or not, he's not the one dragging these blocks. That thought stuck with me. Late at night, lying in the workers' village, I wrestled with questions. Were we really building this pyramid for Pharaoh? Or was it for Egypt itself, for the gods, or maybe just for the pride of saying, look what we made? Sometimes I thought about my father back home, bending over his crops, offering prayers to the Nile. His faith was simple: pray for good floods, pray for good harvests. My faith now was heavier, carved in stone. I wanted to believe that all this pain meant something more. The truth is, faith and fear went hand in hand. Faith in the gods, yes, but fear of them too. If you slacked off, maybe you weren't just angering the overseer, you were angering the gods. If you skipped a ritual, maybe you cursed your own soul. The afterlife was always in the back of our minds. You didn't want to arrive before Osiris with nothing to show for your life except excuses and blisters. So we worked, we prayed, we sang hymns while hauling blocks. We whispered little charms under our breath when ramps creaked. We offered pieces of bread to the gods, even when our stomachs growled. Looking back, I think faith was the only thing stronger than the stone itself. It bound us together, gave us purpose, made us believe that our sweat and suffering weren't wasted. Without it, the pyramid would just be rocks stacked in the desert. With it, it became eternal. And though my doubts never fully went away, every time I saw the pyramid rising against the sky, I felt it again, the sense that we were touching something bigger than ourselves, something divine. Maybe that was Pharaoh's greatest trick, not just convincing us that he was a god, but making us feel like we were building a piece of heaven, one stone at a time. After years of sweat, blisters, sunburns, and more beer than I can count, the day finally came. The pyramid was almost done. When I first arrived, it was just a massive skeleton of stone and ramps. Now it towered above the desert like a mountain touched by the gods. Every time I looked at it, I felt two things at once: pride and exhaustion. Mostly exhaustion. The last stages of construction were all about perfection. No more dragging giant blocks up endless ramps. Instead, the skilled craftsmen took over. They smoothed the outer stones until the sides shone bright in the sun like polished white mirrors. From far away, the pyramid looked like it was glowing. And on top of it all, there was one final task: the capstone. Ah, yes, the golden capstone. Imagine a small pyramid covered in shining gold placed at the very top. That was the crown, the finishing touch, the moment Pharaoh's eternal house became complete. When the day arrived, it felt like the entire world came to watch. The ramps were packed with workers, priests, overseers, and enough guards to make sure no one accidentally ran off with a chunk of gold. The air smelled of incense and dust. The priests chanted, the drums beat, and everyone waited as the golden stone was slowly lifted higher and higher. It gleamed so bright, I had to squint just to look at it. When it finally slid into place, the crowd erupted. Cheers, songs, hands raised to the sky. Even the overseers cracked a smile, which I didn't think their faces were capable of. Some men cried, not from sadness, but from relief. Relief that the endless days, the aching muscles, the blisters and bruises, had all led to this one moment. I stood there in the crowd, sweaty and tired, but my heart felt like it was going to burst. For years I dragged stones, cursed the sun, and dreamed of going home. And now, looking at that gleaming pyramid, I thought, I was part of this. My hands are in these stones. My sweat is in this ground. Even if no one remembers my name, this will remember me. After the capstone, there was a grand ceremony. Pharaoh's priests burned incense, slaughtered bulls, and poured wine in honor of the gods. The crowd feasted. Well, the high officials feasted. We workers got extra bread and beer, which honestly felt like a royal banquet after months of the usual rations. Pharaoh himself came to witness the completion. He stood at the base, gleaming in gold, his crown catching the sunlight. The priests declared that the pyramid would guide his soul into eternity, and the people shouted his name until the desert shook. I shouted too, partly from faith, partly from habit. But deep inside, my thoughts were different. Yes, this was Pharaoh's eternal resting place. Yes, it was his ladder to the stars. But I knew the truth too. This wasn't just for him, it was for Egypt, for the thousands of men whose sweat and labor made it rise, for the women who baked our bread, for the priests who blessed our tools, for the farmers who grew the grain that kept us alive. This pyramid wasn't one man's legacy, it was ours. When the celebrations ended, we returned to the workers' village one last time. Some men danced, some collapsed into sleep, some stared at the pyramid in silence. Me? I climbed onto the roof of my little mud brick house and sat there for hours, watching the moonlight shine on the golden capstone. It looked less like a tomb and more like a beacon calling out to eternity. And I realized something. My life, my name, my tiny clay pot of salt, none of that would last. Someday, my bones would crumble, my house would turn back to dust, and no one would remember the son of a farmer who once carried stone. But the pyramid, that would stand. It would carry my story, even if no one knew it. Every block I touched, every rope I pulled, every curse I muttered under the sun, it was all locked inside those stones forever. Funny thing is, when I started, I thought I was just doing hard labor, just another farmer's son, drafted to haul rocks. But in the end, I understood. I wasn't just building a tomb. I was building history, a monument that would outlive not just me, but generations, maybe even Egypt itself. So if you ever stand before a pyramid, staring up at its endless sides, just remember this. It wasn't built by gods or by Pharaoh alone. It was built by men like me, men who sweated, laughed, cursed, and prayed under the desert sun, men whose names are lost, but whose hands are still here, hidden in the stones. And though my body is gone, my work lives on. My life is written in limestone, stacked high into the sky. My story might fade, but the pyramid will tell it forever.